and we discuss do the birds go along? But you could also go to a bird breeder and say, I want to buy your output for a year or 2 years. In other words, from now until the stipulated end date, I want to buy the eggs or the baby birds that are generated in one of your dovecotes. Or I could say to you, you are a beekeeper, and I want to go into the beekeeping business. Maybe I have a field that needs pollinating. Maybe I have a wife with a sweet tooth. So I say to you, I'd like to buy from you. Now you have two possibilities. I'd like to buy swarms of bees from you. Every year, you have an existing hive. There are, at one point in time, a new queen is generated because they feed it differently than the others. And males are also fed differently. And the female flies off and the males go and mate with her. And then a new swarm is created. So if I want to go into the beehive business, I have to acquire bees from another guy who has them. So I can buy swarms of bees from a guy, or I want to have a general store. I want to buy honey that comes from somebody's beehive. So that's what this mission is going to talk about. Alokeach peiros shavach mechavera. If you buy the output of a pigeon coop from your friend, mafriach berecha rishayna, you cannot take the first babies of the season. Okay, in other words, I buy Bob's output, but I have to let his pair of birds lay eggs. I have to let those eggs hatch. I have to let those baby birds grow up and fly away with the parents. And then the next flight, according to the Mishnah, we're going to have a machlaitis in the Gemara, the next round of babies, until the termination of my contract, I get to take. Okay? Peiros kaveres, if I buy the product of a beehive, notel gimel nechilim, he gets the first 3 swarms of, he takes 3 swarms of bees, and then there's a funny word, misores, and then he does something. He's misores. So I'll give you a hint. The word sris means castrate, right? A sris is a person without any testicles or with non-functioning testicles. So we're going to discuss, how do you castrate bees? You take a magnifying glass and a very small scalpel. But all right, how do you, okay. Chalos dvash, what if he didn't buy the bees? He bought the honey created by the beekeeper's hive. Then he maniach beis chalos. He has to leave behind 2 chalos, 2 chunks of hive. Now, if you ever saw a beehive, it's a box and they have these vertical panels that slide in, and the bees make a honeycomb in the vertical panels. So we're going to suggest here, if I buy Bob's honey output, I have to leave the first and last of these vertical panels so that the bees have food, so that they don't go away. So that, in other words, you want to sell your honey, but you don't want to go out of business. So you sell, if there are 6 panels, you only sell 4 of the 6. The first and the last, Abaya suggests that's the ones that are left behind, so the bees you can continue in business next year. Okay, there's now. What about if I buy olive trees, but I don't want the olives? I want to cut branches and part of the trunk off this olive tree because I want to make a beautiful credenza, and the olive wood has a nice, pattern in it. So, in other words, I want wood for construction or taka for firewood. Okay, so what do I have to do? Meiniach shtei geroifios. I can only cut off the olive tree. I'm not much of the wood, but not all. I have to leave trunk and 2 branches so the olive tree can regenerate, because you're in the olive business and you don't want to lose your trees. End of the Mishnah. So now we're going to question that first rule about leaving the first eggs hatched after the contract is signed, and let those eggs hatch and grow up and fly with the parents. V'asanya, we have a brisa, Berecha Rishayna v'Shniya. No, you have to leave the first batch of eggs grow up to be baby birds and then fly away, grow up and fly away, and the second batch of baby birds to grow up and fly away. That's a contradiction with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said just the first batch. Amar Rav Kahana Lakasha, it's not a problem. Ha lo. When it's the second batch, it's for her. And the Meforshim explained for the daughter. There's an assumption that there's going to be a female in the first batch. And in order for that female to stick with the dovecote, it has to be permitted to lay eggs. So it's 2 doros, not just 1, that you have to leave behind. Ha lo, that's for the daughter. Ha le'ima. And the batch that includes the daughter, the first generation, that's so the mother doesn't go away. Okay, so the concept here is that the mother has a instinctive attraction to and bond with its children. So the mother won't leave if its daughter is still there. That's why you have to leave 1 batch. And the author of the Brisa says, yeah, but if the daughter flies away, then there's no more bond, and the mother could also fly away. So you have to leave the next generation to keep the daughter there. Presumably, you don't need a 3rd and a 4th generation because you've got a bunch of birds. It's a going dovecote, and nobody's going to leave. So, my Shnaima, what's so special about the mother? The mitzdarva the barta, because she has an affinity for her daughter. Va'azuga de shabkinan lo, and also her husband, her mate, is there, so she's got reason to stick around if you leave the first door and possibly the second door. Okay, now, so ahinami. So if you're worried about this affinity issue and the birds shouldn't leave, then you should have the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th generations, where the daughter also has attachments to things. The tavita aima va'azuga the v'shabkinan law. So maybe the daughter, you don't need another generation according to the Mishnah, because the love is a 2-way street. The daughter has this affinity for the mother. So the Gemara says no. Mothers love their children. Children don't necessarily love their parents. Ima abarta mitztavsa. The mother has this genetic attachment to the daughter. Barta Aima lo mitzvta, but the daughter doesn't really care about the mother. The programming in the birds is the mother takes care of its baby, but the baby is it gets out of there as fast as it possibly can. Okay. So, and then as I explained, that once there are two doros, then that's enough birds around that that you don't have to guarantee more babies because they have a community and the birds don't leave. Okay. Peres kavarta notel gimel nechilin misares. The Mishnah said you take 3 swarms of bees if you buy bees from a beekeeper, and then you have sares, which means to cut off or to terminate. Okay, so misarsin, how do you castrate bees? Okay, so Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Bachardo. What you do is you plant mustard plants near the beehive. Okay, and Amre b'marava, and theoretically, the bees are going to eat the mustard plant. You know, they're going to eat the pollen from the nectar from the mustard plant, and it's unpleasant. So they're not going to be interested in foraging anymore. They'll go back in and eat honey, and therefore that'll be the end of that. There won't be a next generation. Okay, Amrei B'Marava, they say back in Israel, Mishmei de Rav Yosef Bar Chanina, Lo Chardel Mesor son, the mustard, it does not technically cause the bees to become sterile. Okay, Ella mitach shepichen chad, because they have this horrible taste. Chosrais the oichlos es duvshonon. They go back into the hive. They eat the honey. They don't continue to go and pollinate plants and stuff. And that would end that there would not be another swarm that season because the bees aren't interested in normal behavior because of the lousy mustard. Okay, that's one impression. Another impression that to cut off means you stop taking swarms from the owner, that there are limits, okay? And we're going to have 2 versions of that. Rabbi Yochanan Omer noitel shloisha nechilin b'ser som. You take 3 swarms, but you have to leave swarms for the owner so he can still be in his beehive business. So you take swarm 1, 3, and 5, and you leave him 2, 4, 6, and weiter. Okay, so the word cut off means cut off taking until there's one for the owner and then one for you. Tanisa Tana, we learn in a Bryce a little differently. Notel Gimel Nechilim B'Zachazeh. You take the first 3 swarms, and then you cut off Mikan V'Elech, and then after that, Notel Achas Umeniach Achas. You take 1. So if I have a long-term contract, I would get, according to this version, swarms 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. And you would take 4, 6, 8, and 10, and the time frame between after the first 3 swarms, your hive is not yet depleted, so you remain in the hive business. Okay? So those are the 2 interpretations. One says that it literally means to cause the bees to stop mating for a while, and one says it means you cut off the pattern of your collecting swarms as they appear. Chalas dvash, what if you want to buy the honey? chalas dvash maniach shtei chalas, etc. You will take whatever honeycombs are in the hive, but you leave two behind. Omer Rav Kahana explains dvash bekaveres. All right, we know that foodstuffs can be makabel tuma if they are wet and then somebody tame touches them. If somebody touches them before they're wet, then they're not makabel. Even they're not makabel tuma. Also, you have to want that thing as food. So if there's an apple on a tree and it's not ripe yet, and I'm not making it food, then it can rain on it all at once, and it's not makabel tuma. But if I say I'm going to eat that apple and then it gets wet, it can be makabel tuma. Similarly, if the apple falls off the tree, if I say I'm going to go out and pick up that fallen apple and then it gets wet, it can be makabel tuma. Also, honey is one of the liquids that can be a hechsher lekabel tuma. So honey has this funny, and we're not going to talk about honey and how it becomes tameh, or if it becomes tameh, a whole complicated Indian. Omer Rav Kahana dvash bekaveres, honey in the comb, in the hive. Never is considered not food. It's a peculiar wording, but it means honey is always considered accessible food, and therefore, if it rains into the hive, it would be then that would be a hechsher lekabel tuma. So you can't have your wife, who is Anita, go out and take in the honey because it would now be tameh.
Can a bee ever become tameh?
A bee?
Yeah.
Well, my aunt bee.
Yes.
No, the bee itself,
no
it's
insect.
not.
A living animal can't
And it's a number one, it's a lot, but even a dead bee, it's not one of the shrutzim. Okay, so Alma Kisover Lo Boy Machashava. So we see, according to Rav Kahana, that the concept of saying, I'm going to make that a food, in other words, thinking of it as a food, which is the first step in it becoming possibly hechsher tuma, does not apply to a beehive. It's automatically food no matter what you think or care. That's Rav Kahana. Meisvei, we argue with Rav Kahana, okay? We don't like that. Dvash kaveres, honey in a beehive, einu lo ochel v'lo mashka. It's not considered a food yet. It's still in the comb, in the hive, and it's not considered a liquid yet. That's what the Tanakama of the Brisa says. So therefore, bees, their hive and the honey therein cannot have a hechsher tuma or become tameh until you say to yourself, I'm going to take that honeycomb out and I'm going to put honey on my toast or in my coffee, rather in my tea. I don't put honey in coffee. Amar Rabaya says, Lo tzricha ella li oisen shtei chalos. This concept of Rav Kahana, what he's talking about, he's talking about the internal combs that you're sold to your friend. Those, because you sold them to your friend, it's clear he wants them, and he's considered them food or liquid, and therefore they're makabel tuma. But the outer two that you want to leave for the bees, so they have nutrients, they're the ones that we're talking about that can't be makabel tuma like them. Okay, so Rava says, Rabbi Lezer, this brisa that says honey is not food until you actually press it out of the comb and want to eat it, that's Rabbi Eliezer, who's a das yachid. And Rav Kahana is representing the Rabbanan, the rule of the majority. So Tanan, because we have another another Mishnah talking about beehives. Kaveres Devairim, a beehive full of bees. Rabbi Eliezer Aimer, Harehi Kakarka. It's considered land. The beehive is outdoors. It's in these boxes to make beehives, but they're standing on the ground. And he said, just like a house is considered karka, the beehive is considered karka. The kaisvin aleha prisbo, you can use the hive as a collateral on a loan, and you could write a prusbul on it to pass the loan into the next Shemitah cycle. Okay, Vienna mikabelis tuma b'makaima, and therefore the beehive cannot be makabel tuma, and the honeycombs within it cannot be makabel tuma. But if you break off some beehive on the Sabbath, intentionally you get misa, and unintentionally, or if the shoygeg, you have to bring a chatas. That's the first opinion. That's a das yachid. V'chachamim aimrim, but the rabbis saying, en kaisvin aleha prusbo, it's not karka, you cannot write a prusbo on it. The ein of the karka, and it's not thought of as land. Umakabeles tuma bimkaima, and the honeycomb can become tome even if, or hekshet tuma, even though it's still in the hive. And if you take honey out inadvertently on Shabbos, it's pater avalasser. Okay, so we see that the Tanakama is like Rav Eliezer, and the majority opinion is like Rav Kahana. Amar Rav Eliezer, my time at the Rav Eliezer. He says, why does Rav Eliezer not agree with everybody else? Why is he a das yachid? Why does he say that a beehive is like karka? Because we have a pasuk. Yitbael Isa biyaras hadvash. He dipped his foodstuff into a forest. Yar is a forest of honey. Okay? V'chi ma inyan ya'er etzel dvash. What is the relationship between a forest and honey? That the pasuk could refer to honey as a forest. Ela oimerloch, when the pasuk, you have to darshan the pasuk to mean ma yaver hatoilesh mimenu b'Shabbos chayev chatas. If you take something off a tree, you cut off a branch, you pick a fruit from a tree on Shabbos, you're chayav misa if it's intentional, and chayav chatas if it's shoygeg. Afterwash, similarly, if you take honey out of the comb, harayda mimenu b'Shabbos chayav chatas, you have to bring the chatas. So Rav Eliezer is paskening the forest pasuk to say that honey is like karka, because trees are considered like karka. Meisvei, we want to argue with that. Now, what are we talking about here? So simply, we're talking about the two combs you leave behind. So they remain essentially part of the hive, okay? We're going to question dvash shazav mekavartai, honey that oozes out of the physical beehive. So it's dripping from the remaining combs, and it's dripping out of the beehive. It is not, from the perspective of the hive owner, food or liquid. Okay? So Bishlam Abaya Nika, that works fine according to Abaya. because we're talking about the remaining, the two that are left in the hive. And therefore they're not food because they're for the bees. So something that comes from non-food remains non-food. Ella Rava Kasha, but according to Rava, it's not coming from those combs. It could come from any comb. And therefore, why isn't it considered, if it came from a food, why isn't it considered a food? Amar Rav Zvid answers, Kigon Shizav al Gabi Kli Ma'os. When the honey drips out of the hive, it has to land on something. So it lands on the ground, it lands on the leaves and the twigs under the hive, it lands on a piece of wood under the hive, and that's disgusting. You're not going to scrape honey off of leaves and eat it. So it's because it's disgusting that you're not making it a foodstuff, and it doesn't matter which one it came out of. Okay, that's one possibility. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Aimer Rav Ya'acha says like this: Kegon shezav al gave kashin. It fell on twigs, little pieces of wood, and that also. He doesn't say disgusting, but it's a similar concept. So you wouldn't want to eat it, so it's not machshir tum. Meisvei, I want to argue with that. Dvash beka verito, eina lo oichel velo mashke. It's not considered food, nor is it considered a liquid with regard to tuma. Chashiv alavla achila. But if you decide you plan to eat it, matame tumas eichlin, then it can become tameh hechsher tuma. Lamashkin, if you plan to use that honey as a beverage, meaning you make mead from it, you put it in your tea, something like that. Tameya tumas mashkin, and then it gets the tuma of liquid, which is a complicated process I'm not going to go into. That all works fine according to Abaya, because again, he's talking about the combs that are left behind, and you would have to positively designate them as food so they could be makabel tuma. Ela Rava. But according to Rava, who says we're not talking specifically about the remaining cones, and even they could, according to Rav Kahana, are always considered food, it's a problem. It's a kasha. So Amar Lach Rava would answer, Tarit Hache, explain the brisa as follows. I decide to make the honey, think of the honey as I'm going to eat it. It still doesn't become tameh. Lamashkin, even if I think of using it to make mead, it does not yet become tameh at Thomas Mashkin. So Rava is holding like Rav Eliezer that it never is tameh until you take it out of the hive. Tanya Kavasi, the Rav Kahana, we have a brisa though that agrees with Rav Kahana. Devash b'kavarto, honey in the honeycomb, in the beehive. Metame tumas eichlin shelo b'machshava. It can be makabel tuma whether or not you think of it as food. It's automatic. It's always considered food. So that's the end of that. Whether or not honey is makabel tuma. Now we're going on to cutting branches off a tree, but you want to leave the trunk and the first couple of branches so the tree can regenerate. So the rest of this discussion is going to be about various trees, how you would have to trim them. Do trees indeed regenerate if you cut much of them off, you prune them, etc.? Okay. Zeisim lokutz maniach shtei gerothed Garopios. With an olive tree, you have to leave trunk and the lower two branches. Okay, Tanurabanan, we have a brisa that teaches Halakeach Elon Mechaver Lokotz. If you buy wood that's on a tree from your neighbor with the understanding you're going to cut it off so that you have the wood, Magbia Minakarka Tefach V'Kaitzetz. You have to literally you have to lift the axe a tefach. But what it means is you can chop it off, but you must leave the root ball and one tefach of trunk, which is about 4 inches. Okay, so that it can regenerate. Besulas hashikama. But if you're talking about a virgin sycamore, meaning a sycamore that has never had been pruned, it never had branches removed from it. It's a young, quote, virgin sycamore. Gimel tvachim. That sycamore apparently needs more trunk, so you have to leave 3 tvachim, which is 11 or 12 inches. Okay, sadin hashikama. But if it's been previously pruned, that sycamore, base tvachim, then you can leave only 2 tvachim, which is 7 or 8 inches. Okay? Bakanim o bigafanim, if you're talking about reeds or you're talking about grapevines, minha pekach ulamayla. If you ever notice a tree, if you cut off a branch, it makes what's called a knot. So when it comes to vines or when it comes to reeds, when you prune them, it's not a fixed amount, 1, 2, 3 tvachim. It's you look for the lowest knot and you can cut directly above the lowest knot. Okay? So now it can regenerate. Okay, the kolim, when it comes to dekel, to palm trees, uba arozim and cedars of Lebanon, then chayfer umisharesh, you can not only take out the tree, you can even dig up the roots. You know, the burl wood in the root is very nice pattern, and that has a special extra value. So you can dig out the whole root ball because lefi she'en gizon machalif, because these trees aren't going to regenerate anyway. So there's no reason to leave value in the ground. You can dig the whole thing out. So now we're going to talk about this brisa and ask questions on it, etc. Oh, besulas hashikama gimel tvachin ba'inan. You have to have 3 tvachin. You have to leave a whole foot of sycamore trunk behind. Baramino, I can argue with that. Ein kaitzin besulas hashikama b'shavi'is. You're not allowed to cut down a sycamore in the 7th year. Okay, mipnei shehi avoida, because that's an avoida asur, because that's like harvesting. It's like if you cut off the wheat, it's never going to grow again. So it's not trimming a tree, it's harvesting the wood, and that's forbidden. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer kedarka asur, to cut it the normal way, leaving 3 tvachim. That's what's forbidden. Ella. Magbia yud tvachim v'koitzeitz. But if you cut it off 10 tvachim up, that's about 40 inches, that's okay. Oh, goymem me'im ha'aretz, or you can chop it off level with the ground. That's what he says, which means there's a shinoi and you're not doing the eraisa malacha. Me'im ha'oretz hu dekoshe. So anyway, Rabbi Yehuda seems to have implied that cutting a tree off at ground level is a bad thing to do. Ha adif me'ale lo, But if you cut it above ground level, meaning a tefach up, that's good for the tree because now it will regenerate and have new sturdy branches, etc. So why did the Brisa say that in some cases it's 2 or 3 tvachim, if only 1 tefach is all that's needed? Amar Abaye gimel tvachim ma'aleh, that cutting it down to a 3 tefach stump is what's good for it. Me'im ha'aretz, but cutting it off at ground level, vadai kashala, is definitely bad for it. Mikan v'elech, but other length stumps where some of it is comes out of the ground, lo makshe kashe, it's not essential. It's not specifically bad for the tree. V'lav alaye mi'alela, and it's not especially good for the tree. Okay, it's sort of neutral. Okay. Gave Shavi'is, but when it comes to cutting trees during the Shemitah year, Avdinan Mide Davade Kashela, you are allowed to act in your field in a way that's harmful to the tree for sure. Gave Mekachu Memchar, but when it comes to buying and selling the wood, if you are a forester who's in the business of producing lumber, Avdinan Midei Tahavade Malela, you're only allowed to act where you're sure you're benefiting the tree so you can continue your business, and therefore we leave 3 tvachim. Okay. The Dikolim Uba Arazim, when it comes to palms and cedars, Chofer Misharesh, you can dig up the roots, Lefisha Ein, Gizan Mechalif, because they won't regenerate anyway. The Erez Ein Gazu Mechalif, is it true that a cedar tree does not ever regenerate? Ha Dorish Reb Chia bar Lulani, Rav Chia bar Lulani says, we have a pasuk that compares Talmidei Chachamim to palms and cedars, right? My diksiv tzadik tamar yifrach ke'eres balvana nizkeh, that the righteous person will grow like a date palm, and he'll flourish like the cedars of Lebanon. So im nemar tamar lama nemar ares. If you're going to tell me a pasuk about Talmidei Chachamim, so talk about palm trees and leave out cedars. Okay, the im nemer eres. If you're talking about cedars, lama nemer tamar. What do you have to tell me about palm trees? Ilu nemer eres velo nemer tamar. So it explains. If you only talk about a cedar, but you do not include the palm tree, I could say back to you, Ma eres ein ose peiros. A cedar tree does not generate edible fruit. You can eat the nuts from a cedar. Af tzadik ein ose peiros. So too a righteous person doesn't generate fruit. Meaning his children aren't necessarily Talmidei Chachamim, and he doesn't get credit in this world. People don't respect tzaddik. He certainly doesn't make a lot of money if he's a Torah scholar. Lakach nemr tamar. So because of that, they have to stick the palm tree in. That because the palm tree has dates, so it does generate peiros in this world, and you do get benefit both in this world and in the world to come. Vim nemer tamer, but if I only said palm trees, velo nemer eres, and I didn't mention the cedars at all, I would have said to you, ma tamer en gizo mechalif, just like a palm tree, if you chop it down, it will never regenerate. Af tzaddik ein gazu mechalif. So too, a righteous person does not regenerate. In other words, you can't guarantee his kids will be Talmidei Chachamim. And you can't guarantee, you don't see Olam Haba, you can't guarantee that his righteousness will be rewarded to come. Lekach nemru erez. Therefore, we mentioned both. We add the cedar, and the pasuk talks about both. Elahacha b'mayaskina. So exactly, let's go back to talking about trees. What are we dealing with? Bishar mine arazim, other kinds of cedar trees. Kida Rava bar Rav Huna, because he tells us the Amar Rava bar Rav Huna in a brisa. He tells us that bar Rav Huna. Rav Huna tells us the Amar Rava bar Rav Huna. He explains Amrei Bei Rav in the yeshiva of Rav. They quote a pasuk. Gimel mine arazim hein. There are 10 kinds of cedar trees. Shenemar, because there's a pasuk. Etain b'midbar eres shita chadas eitz shemen asim rather, etc. We're going to now darshan that pasuk. Erez arza. The word erez in the pasuk means a cedar tree. Shita turanisa. That's a palm tree, a pine tree, a Christmas tree type thing. Hadas, that's asa. That's what we call myrtle or hadas. Eitz shemen aparsimo. That's balsam wood, which is very oily. Barosh berossi. That's boxwood, they translated. Tidhar shoga. That's a fir tree, a different kind of evergreen. Ta'ashur shorbina. That's a shorbina. We don't know what that is. So the problem with that is they said there are 10, and the pasuk only lists 7. So how do we worry? Ani Zion Ave, that's only 7. He also Rabdini Yomer when Rabdini came from Israel to Babel. Gosifu Alehen, Alaynim, Almainim, and Almugim. They add 3 other trees, Alaynim, Almugim, and Almonim. I keep thinking is almonds, but it's not. Almainim, Hut.